Welcome to Think About It with your host, Jaden Miller.
Good day, and welcome to Think About It with Jaden Miller. I'm your host, Jaden Miller. It's great to be with you all again. Again, I appreciate you joining and I appreciate you supporting my podcast. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe on my YouTube channel, and like, comment, and follow on your favorite podcast platform. I strive to drop new episodes every week, traditionally on Sundays and Wednesdays. But anyway, I really strive to do so. Got a busy schedule, so sometimes my striving only gets to one of those days, but I do try to put out the best information that I can. I'm on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Spreaker, Google Podcasts, Castbox, SoundCloud, iHeartRadio, and a myriad of other podcast platforms. So again, I thank you all for joining me today. I want to talk a little bit about the United States Senate and its failure to pass the voting rights bill. I know this is a little controversial. I have friends that are on the Republican side that feel as though that this bill is a power grab, and I have friends on the Democratic side, that feel that voting rights should be available to all citizens, and they feel as though the Republicans are trying to deny this, especially since there are a lot of bills and a lot of things have been passed in state houses around the country. And so I want to take a different approach to this and look at it from the way that the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King did, in terms of how he saw moderates in this country and how often their silence led to really this gap in time in terms of, civil rights for African Americans. And I'm going to try to compare that to how things are going with the Voting Rights Act here in 2022. Just a little history. Back in 1963, and specifically in April of 1963, Dr. King had been arrested. And he was arrested because of their Birmingham campaign. And the Birmingham campaign was one in which they were calling for parading, demonstrating, boycotting, trespassing, and picketing of the city of Birmingham because of its racist and segregationist policies. All right. Dr. King was met with unusually harsh conditions when he was in the Birmingham jail, and he received a statement, or he read a statement in a newspaper by 8 white Alabama clergymen, and they were writing against King and his methods. Now, these 8 clergymen supported King but didn't support the methods, and so King categorized them as moderates. Okay. They agreed that social injustices existed, but they argued that the battle against racial segregation should be fought solely in the courts and not on the streets. And as a minister, Dr. King responded to their criticisms on religious grounds. As an activist challenging an entrenched social system, he argued on legal, political, and historical grounds. All right. Dr. King spoke about the country's oppression of Black people. And as an orator, he used many persuasive techniques to reach the hearts and minds of his audience. And his letter was a powerful defense of the motivations, tactics, and goals of the Birmingham campaign and the civil rights movement more generally. Dr. King began this letter by responding to the criticism that he and his fellow activists were outsiders causing trouble in the streets of Birmingham. And Dr. King referred to his responsibility as a leader of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, which had numerous affiliated organizations throughout the South. And he challenged these white clergymen by telling them that I was invited by our Birmingham affiliate because injustice is here in what then was probably the most racially divided city in the country, with its brutal police, unjust courts, and many unsolved bombings of Negro homes and churches. Now, back during this time, and if you go back in history, you will recall that during this time, there had been a bombing in Birmingham of a church that killed 4 young African-American girls. Okay. I mean, how cowardly, these racists were to put a bomb in a church. Okay, and kill these young girls. All right. And so Dr. King and his movement, the civil rights movement, are protesting and bringing attention to the country, these racist acts, these violent acts. Okay, these, as he put it, unsolved bombings of Negro homes and churches. All right. And what Dr. King is writing back to them is that, his belief that all communities and states were interrelated. And he says to them that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. All right. And he also challenged them that says that anyone who lives inside the United States can never be considered an outsider anywhere within its bounds. And then he also went on to say that, white people successfully rejected his nonviolent activists as rabble-rousing outside agitators, that could encourage millions of African Americans to seek solace and security in black nationalist ideologies, a development that will lead inevitably, according to Dr. King, to a frightening racial nightmare. All right. These white clergymen also disapproved of tensions created by public actions such as sit-ins and marches. And King confirmed that he and his fellow demonstrators were indeed using non-violent direct action in order to create constructive tension. The tension was intended to compel meaningful negotiation with the white power structure, without which true civil rights could never be achieved. And citing previous failed negotiations, King wrote that the black community was left with no alternative. We know, according to Dr. King, that through painful experience that freedom is never voluntarily given by the oppressor. It must be demanded by the oppressed. All right. So in this letter, and again, it's called Letter from a Birmingham Jail. Okay. Dr. King is challenging these white moderates on their ideas and their ideologies that, you shouldn't protest. You shouldn't march. You should let the courts handle it. Well, we're going to allow racist courts to determine our freedom. How is that fair? Okay. How is that right? That doesn't even make sense. Okay. So you must take to the streets. Okay. And he's trying to remind them that, especially the Christian clergymen, that, Jesus didn't leave, human rights to the courts. Okay. Jesus was going to leave, the rights of the Jewish people to Pontius Pilate. Okay. He was going to leave it to the Roman authorities. Okay. Yeah, really? All right. So he's letting them know, okay, that he's gravely disappointed with the white moderate. And let me read a little bit of Dr. King's letter from a Birmingham jail. And I'm going to read that to you in just a moment when I come back. I just want to give you a really quick announcement and talk to you about some guys that have a really, really great show that I really enjoy. It is called the Man Space Podcast. All right. You can check out Rest and Less These guys discuss life, relationships, and a multitude of subjects from a man's perspective. Their latest episode from January 19th is entitled Man versus the Millionaire Mindset. You have got to listen to this. You have got to listen to these guys. They are really great. All right. You can find out more about them on the manspacepodcast.com. That's their website, the manspacepodcast.com. These guys are fantastic. I recommend that you listen to them. Check out Russ and Les. You can find them on all of the podcast platforms. Just like with mine, you can find them on Spotify, Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, all of them. So again, check out my boys, Russ and Les, on the Man Space podcast. All right, let me go back and talk to you a little bit about this letter from a Birmingham jail. And as I was mentioning, Dr. King is challenging these white clergymen, okay, because their interpretation of Christianity and religious order is challenging, okay, for Dr. King, in terms of them being white moderates and saying that, you know what, you should not be doing these things. You should not be marching. You should not be sitting in. And I'm going to relate these back to the Voting Rights Act in just a moment. But this is what Dr. King says. He says, I must make two confessions to you, my Christian and Jewish brothers. These are the clergymen that oppose him. He says, first, I must confess that over the past few years, I have been gravely disappointed with the white moderate. I have almost reached the regrettable conclusion that the Negro's great stumbling block in his stride toward freedom is not the white citizen's counselor or the Ku Klux Klaner, but the white moderate who is more devoted to order than to justice, who prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice, who constantly says, and he's talking about the white moderate, I agree with you in the goal you seek, but I cannot agree with your methods of direct action, who paternalistically believes he can set the timetable for another man's freedom, who lives by a mythical concept of time, and who constantly advises the Negro to wait for a more convenient season. Shallow understanding from people of goodwill is more frustrating than absolute misunderstanding from people of ill will. Lukewarm acceptance is much more bewildering than outright rejection. Okay, so Dr. King is playing the dozens with these white clergymen, and he's letting them know, first of all, how dare you? Okay, so we have been seeking justice in this country for hundreds of years. And just because you don't like that we sit in or that we march in the face of bombings of churches, lynching of black men and black women, okay, and the denial of human rights, not to mention civil rights, you want us to, wait for a more convenient season. Dr. King is saying, how dare you? So you disagree with our methods of direct action, but yet you want us to wait for a racist court system to determine our future? Well, it's that same racist court system that has kept us in bondage for years. All right? So Dr. King is letting them know that, you know what? Your lukewarm acceptance is so bewildering. And it is worse than those Ku Klux Klanners, okay, that pillage, that rape, okay, and that murder. You won't stand up to them, okay, but you challenge our efforts. So it's acceptable to some degree to murder and maim, okay, but it's unacceptable to march against that, to sit in against that, to demand your civil rights in public. Duh, dude. What kind of sense does that make? That's what Dr. King is trying to get across to them. He goes on to say, I had hoped that the white moderate would understand that law and order exist for the purpose of establishing justice, and that when they fail in this purpose, they become the dangerously structured dams that block the flow of social progress. You know, quite often people forget how this nation was founded, okay? All right. You know, there's this great philosopher, that talked about, how we as people should exist in a nation governed by laws, governed by a social order, a social contract. John Locke, he talks about how we have the right to life and liberty and property, okay? And he goes on to explain to us that when government does not do what it is supposed to do for the people, that government should be overthrown, okay? This is John Locke saying this, all right? Our founding fathers decided that, we cannot be under the auspices of Great Britain under King George III because they are brutal and they are tyrants. So now here in the South, in the United States, these white moderates are saying, well, maybe you should wait. Okay. Yeah, we know lynching is wrong and, denying you of your civil rights is wrong, but can we wait to a better time? And Dr. King is saying, no, we've been waiting. And you want us to continue to wait? How many black men have to be lynched in Mississippi? How many black boys, have to be murdered and a gun put to their head or their genitals chopped off or their ears chopped off until we can get some respect in this nation? That is what Dr. King is trying to get across to these white clergymen who still say, you know what? Just chill out, okay? It'll happen for you. And Dr. King is saying you don't get to set the time for us anymore. All right, because we've waited and we've waited too long. All right. He goes on to say, I had hoped that the white moderate would understand that the present tension in the South is a necessary phase of the transition from an obnoxious negative peace in which the Negro positively accepted his unjust plight to a substantive and positive peace in which all men will respect the dignity and worth of human personality. Actually, he goes on to say, we who engage in nonviolent direct action are not the creators of tension. We merely bring to the surface the hidden tension that is already alive. We bring it out in the open where it can be seen and dealt with, like a boil that can never be cured so long as it is covered up, but must be open with all its ugliness to the natural medicines of air and light. Injustice must be exposed with all the tension its exposure creates to the light of human conscience and the air of national opinion before it can be cured. Dr. King challenges them and says, in your statement, you assert that our actions, meaning the marchers, the sit-in people that are sitting in, even though peaceful, must be condemned because they precipitate violence. What? So because we're marching and sitting in to get our civil rights, because ugly people then come in and be violent, hitting us with bottles and throwing fists at us, that we are the ones that to be condemned? So yet someone beats us over the head, but because we sat in, at a lunch counter, because white people and black people should be able to go anywhere in this country and sit wherever they want to, then we're wrong? Fools. That's what he's saying to them. You fools. How is that logical? He goes on to say, isn't this like condemning a robbed man because his possession of money precipitated the evil act of robbery? Isn't this dumb? So because I've got money in my pocket, I'm wrong if somebody comes and robs me. What kind of sense does that make? So he's making them look like fools, in their argument that, oh, well, you know what? You shouldn't march. And the reason why you're marching is why all of this violence is happening. Dr. King, I know he was just irritated with them. He goes on to say, isn't this like condemning Socrates because his unswerving commitment to truth and his philosophical inquiries precipitated the act by the misguided populace in which they made him drink hemlock? Isn't this like condemning Jesus because his unique God consciousness and never ceasing devotion to God's will precipitated the evil act of crucifixion? We must come to see that, as the federal courts have consistently affirmed, it is wrong to urge an individual to cease his efforts to gain his basic constitutional rights because the court may precipitate violence. Society must protect the robbed and punish the robber. I'll say that again. Society must protect the robbed and punish the robber. You don't punish a man because he's got money in his pocket and he was robbed by some fool. What sense does that make? It makes none. And Dr. King is trying to convey this, all right, to these individuals. And I'll go on and end this part and get back to the voting rights thing by saying this. Dr. King says, I had also hoped that the white moderate would reject the myth concerning time in relation to the struggle for freedom. I have just received a letter from a white brother in Texas. He writes, all Christians know that the colored people will receive equal rights eventually, but it is possible that you are in too great a religious hurry. It has taken Christianity almost 2,000 years to accomplish what it has. The teachings of Christ take time to come to earth. So Dr. King responds by saying such an attitude stems from a tragic misconception of time, from the strangely irrational notion that there is something in the very flow of time that will inevitably cure all ills. Actually, time itself is neutral. It can be used either destructively or constructively. More and more, I feel that the people of ill will have used time much more effectively than have the people of goodwill. We will have to repent in this generation, not merely for the hateful words and actions of the bad people, but for the appalling silence of the good people. Human progress never rolls in on wheels of inevitability. It comes through the tireless efforts of men willing to be co-workers with God. And without this hard work, time itself becomes an ally of the forces of social stagnation. We must use time creatively in the knowledge that the time is always ripe to do right. Now is the time to make real the promise of democracy and transform our pending national elegy into a creative psalm of brotherhood. Now is the time to lift our national policy from the quicksand of racial injustice to the solid rock of human dignity. All right. So let's fast forward to 2022. All right. So the Senate Democrats, based upon the will of their constituents, put forth voting rights legislation. Okay. And they put forth this voting rights legislation to ensure, all right, that all Americans have the right to vote. See, in 1964, there was a 1965, there was a Voting Rights Act passed, okay, to ensure specifically that people of color did not have to, go through hoops in order to vote, okay? Because Southern states were denying them the right to do so by having laws, poll tax laws and literacy laws, so that, blacks who had not reached educational levels that whites had would fail them, thus not being able to cast a ballot, and then diluting African American power to be represented in government. Okay? So now, after the previous administration and attempts now to pass laws, all right, that make it harder to vote, particularly for people of color, all right, the Democrats decide that, you know what, we want federal laws, all right, that cease Republicans from passing laws that cut black and brown voters out of the process, and thus white voters as well. All right. The Republicans say that it isn't about voting rights. They say it's a naked power grab. Really? So giving people or ensuring that people have the right to vote is a power grab. So it's not civic participation by making sure that people have increased ways to participate in something that is just a basic right for Americans, and that is the right to ensure that proper individuals represent us in government? What is wrong with individuals that vote along party lines against the will of most Americans? There's something wrong with that. All right. There are 52 senators that chose to save a filibuster, okay, to ensure that a measure guaranteeing the right to vote to all Americans fairly fails. Wow. The thing is, most Americans support the passage of voting rights protections. There was a poll done that said that 53% of likely voters said they would approve of changing the filibuster if it meant passing the Voting Rights Act is called the Freedom to Vote Act and the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, while only just 35% of respondents said they would oppose to such an action. Isn't protecting the right to vote much more important to the majority of likely voters than preserving the Senate filibuster rule? Don't people want a government that they can see working? Wow. And you wonder why the approval rating of Congress is in the 20s. Very, very low. All right. Because these individuals don't do the will of the people, they do their own will. And so here we are, many, many years after the Voting Rights Act was passed. In 2022, instead of us going forward, there are individuals that want to send us backwards just to protect their power. Okay, so Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell calls, this Voting Rights Act a power grab. Well, it seems to me what you're trying to do is preserve the power that you have. Okay, the power that you have, not the power and the will of the American people to ensure that its citizens, all of its citizens, be able to vote and to preserve democracy and the fairness of elections. So Dr. King challenged the white moderates back in the 1960s. And so these same individuals that, would deny people today of the same rights that Dr. King was fighting for back in the 50s and 60s, they want to deny this same stuff today. Wait. You'll get your turn. Wait. Don't protest. Let us handle it. And if history shows us anything, when we allow someone that does not walk in our shoes, does not see things the way that we see things, cannot empathize or have a perspective that guarantees, that all of us can participate in the wealth and the goodness of this great nation, that there is something wrong there. When there's a political party that instead of seeking out the will of the majority, seeking out the will of the people, seek out their own will, that's not government in action. At least not good government in action. All right. So people have taken to the streets again. People have protested. People have gone on hunger strikes. People have decided that senators that aren't supportive of these measures, that they will withhold money, withhold votes, withhold support. The United States is at a crossroads again, just like it was back in the 1960s. It's at a crossroad. And just as America was forced to change back in the 1960s, America is going to be forced to change its ways again, because when the will of the people is denied by individuals whose own greed, who cannot see the forest for the trees, who are only interested in protecting themselves and their small group of individuals, the small-minded group of individuals. History has always shown us that when you don't look out for the good, when you don't look out for those people that are marching towards goodness, you will fail. This is Jaden Miller. I hope that you enjoyed my podcast. Think About It with Jaden Miller. Please don't forget, like, share, and subscribe on my YouTube channel. And like, comment, and follow on your favorite podcast platform. I look forward to seeing you on my next episode. Think About It with Jaden Miller. Have a great day.
Thank you for listening to Think About It with Jaden Miller. Don't forget to like and subscribe to his YouTube channel, and like and follow on your favorite podcast platform.